Well, good morning, everyone. As everyone is continuing to come in, I would like to welcome you to the Diversity in Higher Education plenary presentation. And I have the honor of introducing our speaker, Lance Bennett, who is the Director of Diversity Admissions at the Kellogg School of Management. And Lance has responsibility for diversity admissions across all MBA programs. He serves on Kellogg's Inclusion Coalition and was co-president of Kellogg's African American Employee Resource Group. He facilitates diversity workshops within and outside of the Kellogg community. Prior to his role at Kellogg, he led diversity admissions for the Wake Forest School of Business and spent over 20 years at Wachovia Corporation, where he held several managerial roles. In 2003, he was certified as an internal diversity consultant, facilitating diversity workshops across the bank's footprint and consulting on diversity issues with senior leadership. He's known for his passion for diversity and inclusion and his ability to build and foster relationships across a wide spectrum of identity groups. And personally, I have heard Lance speak and he is fabulous. So I'm so excited that he is joining us today, and I'm going to turn it over to him.
All right, thank you, C, for the introduction, and thanks, SACRAO, for inviting me to speak today. Steve and Melissa and Kim and C, they've all been excellent in helping me, make sure that everything was prepared for today. So excited to be here with you to have a conversation about diversity in higher education. And as you can see, I have a hashtag there of engaging diversity. So as C said, my name is Lance Bennett, and I go by the pronouns of he, him, his. And I want to jump right in because I try to build a lot of content into whatever time that I'm given. So we're going to jump in and talk about engaging diversity. And how I thought we would ground this conversation is in this concept, this definition of cultural humility. Cultural humility is a lifelong process of self-reflection, self-critique, and commitment to understanding and respecting different points of view, and engaging humbly, authentically, and from a place of learning. I want to go back and talk through this definition again, because I think this is really important and it's a great grounding for us as we go into our conversation today. First of all, understanding that, this is a lifelong process. DEI is a journey. It is not a destination. We never really get there. We just continue to learn. So it's a lifelong process. And it's a process of having that self-reflection, self-critiquing is super important. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then having this commitment to understanding and respecting different points of view. That is something that we certainly see that is lacking in, our current environment, is having this respect for differing points of view. And so what I really love is the word having this commitment to understanding and respecting those views. Engaging humbly and authentically, that's really about, acknowledging that, I don't know what I don't know, and I'm willing to learn from you. And so that will take us to this place of learning. And Melanie Tevelarn and Jan Murray Garcia are the ones who, those are the two women who, have this cultural humility. And so oftentimes Black women aren't given credit for what they do. So I wanted to use that hashtag, cite Black women. I didn't make up that hashtag, by the way. So cultural humility is hopefully how we'll be grounded as we go into our conversation. And so we have some objectives for the hour. We want to get an opportunity to think about current events and how they impact our schools and organizations and ourselves. We want to learn to see ourselves and our surroundings through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then explore some perspectives from both the individual and group level. We want to challenge ourselves to look and go beyond common ground and engage difference about the difference. And then this is definitely not, the objective is not to solve every issue or answer every question. It's really to start conversations, and hopefully these conversations will take you back to your schools and organizations. If you notice, I bolded the words our and ourselves because I am here as a learner as well. And these objectives work for me as well. I am trying to grow each and every day in this space. So how do we get there? We're going to talk a little bit about some session norms. I'll do some early sharing about, current events and things that I see from my viewpoint, and then get your reactions to it, because I want to try to get you as engaged in this process as possible. I will introduce myself a little more fully about how I show up as the person that is leading this conversation today. And then we're going to switch into to talk about group memberships. We all belong to many different groups, and so we'll talk about the ways that we belong to those groups, and then we'll talk through the individual versus the group dynamic. We're all individuals, and we want to be seen for who we are as individuals, but we're often seen for the group memberships that we belong to. And so we'll talk about how do we manage through that, and how do we start looking and owning some of the group memberships that we have as well in in our engagements. And then we'll wrap up. So session norms, we want you to be open to other viewpoints. I'll be asking you to put some information in the chat. I'll be asking you some polling questions. So we definitely want you to be open to other viewpoints, because we all don't see through the same lens. And then also be open to where we are. And what I mean by that is where we are on our diversity journey. So some of the things that I discussed today, you may have heard before, you may be doing them. And if you are, that is great. But for others, this may be the first time that they've heard something that I say. And so we want to allow everyone to kind of be curious and be where they are on this journey. Definitely, we want you to share whatever you have learned, but not necessarily who told the story. So this is going to be around confidentiality, with the exception of me. You can say to anybody anything that you hear me say, but if anyone speaks up, in our session today, we definitely want to keep that confidential. We want you to speak your first draft. What I mean by that is oftentimes, especially around diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations, we often get to a place where we're like, oh, well, I need to make sure I'm using the most politically correct language or the most inclusive language that is happening today. And so we kind of get stuck and paralyzed because we're trying to think of how to say it. Here in this session, we want you to just speak that first draft, what comes to your mind, which also means we have to assume best intentions. So as we go through, whatever is said, whatever is put in the chat, we want to assume best intentions. And I hope you will do that for me as well, because I have the best of intentions, but I may say something that may not resonate with you. And so so we want you to assume best intentions, and then of course be engaged through the polling questions, through the chats that I may ask you to do. So those are session norms. And so now what I'm going to do is, I have another monitor next to me. I'm going to read some things that I wrote down about, kind of things that have been happening from 2020 up until now, and just share some of my thoughts, and then I'll get your reactions on the other side. So 2020 was certainly a year, to unprecedented year, and 2020 has started off with, basically saying, I can top that, right? So we've seen some crazy stuff already in 2021. We're still squarely in the middle of a global pandemic, one that has impacted everyone in the world in some kind of way. But here in the US, it has disproportionately impacted people of color, with African Americans being the group impacted the greatest, from who's contracting the virus, who's losing their lives to the virus. We also see the virus has exposed disparities in education and healthcare and unemployment, which is also impacting women and especially working moms disproportionately. We now have vaccines. Great news. But these vaccines have also sparked lots of conversations with different opinions, bringing on emotions like joy and hope and skepticism and fear, with the attention of skepticism and fear lying in communities of color. Another vaccine conversation is about developed countries, where in poor or developing countries, and there's a lack of access to the vaccine, as rich and more developed countries, buy up supplies. 2020 saw social justice and racial equity become a part of our national dialogue, with law enforcement squarely in the middle. In 2020, we also saw Supreme Court decisions that have, in my humble opinion, positively impacted the LGBTQ plus community in receiving workplace protections through Title VII, DACA being reinstated and will begin accepting applications again for the first time in 3 years. There was also a decision by the court to declare much of eastern Oklahoma as an Indian reservation, potentially one of the most consequential legal victories for Native American or indigenous people in decades. We lost an icon on the bench in Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which has certainly ramped up the discussion on women's reproductive rights. According to the Human Rights Campaign, 2020 saw a record number of transgender and gender non-conforming individuals killed. transgender women make 37 were killed last year, which is more than any year on record since 2013. And Black transgender women make up 66% of the cases over that period of time. We also saw a historic major party ticket with Kamala Harris nominated, accepting the nomination and sworn in as the first woman, the first South Asian American and Black vice president in our nation's history. I think we will always remember the events that took place on the Capitol on January 6th. And guess what? I've only scratched the surface. And regardless of where you sit on any of what I've mentioned or any issue, it has touched us. It has impacted us, and it has impacted our students. And regardless of where you sit on any of these issues, I think we all can agree that there's one common thread. Leadership is at a premium. Leadership is in the spotlight. So I'm excited to be here talking to you about engaging difference and engaging diversity, because I believe strongly that this is also about leadership. Those institutions who will do this well will differentiate themselves and will be a coveted place for students to study. And the only way for an institution to lead in this space is to have individual leaders who are willing to do the work, willing to be uncomfortable, and practice cultural humility. So I hope through the rest of the time that we have, that we will be able to positively impact each other in building inclusivity. So with that, I'm going to stop and get some reactions. So I want to get your reactions to my opening. And this is where, whatever your thoughts are in general, I want you to speak your first draft. And instead of, because I see we have over 200 people, instead of speaking it verbally, I'd love for you to throw them in the chat, and we can just see how we're doing. So please, just reactions to what you heard. And I'm reading, I'm sure some of you are reading as well. I'm not going to call out what anyone has said, because there's so many great things that I'm reading here. So, all right. So I see many of you responded in the chat, and I see that is still happening. So thank you for doing that. Feel free to continue to put things in the chat, as we go through. But I want to keep us moving. All right, so we're going to have, now I want you to answer a polling question. And so we can get a little help with the polling question. How do you see current events impacting, your school and your organization? Either current events have, made my school and organization more inclusive or less inclusive. And I see you are answering, and the numbers are going up. All right, I think we can end the polling. I think I have a good sense. So we saw, actually there's 89% of you who have said that the current events have made your school and organization more inclusive. And there's 11% of you who said that, it has made it less inclusive. And I can actually understand each perspective, depending on, what is happening and what your viewpoint is, and where you actually sit within your school. So thank you for answering that. So we can close that poll. And we will go to the, oh, I think I needed to do that. Okay, so I'll stop the sharing. So all right, so we want to go to our second polling question. Thank you. How do you see current events impacting your individual willingness or ability to engage difference? these current events have made you more willing to engage difference or less willing or able to engage difference? All right, I think we can, I see many of you have voted. So we can go ahead and end that polling, and the results you can see here is that 89% of you again said that current events make you more willing and able to engage difference. And then there's 11% who say current events make you less willing and able to engage difference. Again, those who are in that 11%, I certainly can understand that perspective. There are times where I think for myself, I am always willing to engage difference, but the current events sometimes make me less able to do that because I may not have willing participants to engage with me in their difference and have those conversations. So I can certainly understand that as well. Thank you for doing that. And so we wanted to just kind of get a feel. I wanted to get a feel for just kind of where we all are on, current events and how they're impacting our organization. So we'll continue to move on. All right. And we can remove the polling question, please. All right, so facilitator introduction. And so what I want to do is talk a little bit about, how and why I do this work. So I guess it was about 18 or so years ago, I was working in banking and I was in operations management and I was doing pretty well, being promoted fairly regularly. And then I was asked to be part of our corporate diversity council. And, I jumped at the chance because I thought this would be a great opportunity for me to be able to get, more exposure to senior leadership. It's also an area that, I feel pretty passionate about. So a prerequisite to being on that council was I had to go to a 3.5-day diversity and inclusion workshop. And I walked into that workshop, really believing that, I understood a lot about diversity. I mean, I'm Black. Of course I know about diversity. And so I was just excited to go to the workshop. I left 3.5 days later realizing that I didn't know very much about diversity and I knew even less about inclusion. Now, I absolutely understood my experience as a Black person, but I didn't understand at all the experiences of others who have been impacted based on their identity groups. The other thing that was really a surprise to me was that sometimes my lack of engagement with certain communities could actually foster an environment of exclusivity compared to inclusivity. And my biggest surprise coming out of those 3.5 days was really around the fact that I actually have a lot of privilege. Um, I need to pause for a second because I realized I didn't plug my laptop in and it's going to die. So give me 1 second. I apologize. Okay, I am back. That was scary. I thought, oh no, if my laptop dies, this is not going to be good. Okay, so I go. Like I said, I realized that I have a lot of privilege. Privilege as being a man, privilege as being heterosexual, privilege as being fully able-bodied. I have privilege of being Christian. I was especially living in the Southeast at the time. Not having any, disabilities from a mental or any learning disabilities. So all those things help me walk through life very differently. Um, and so privilege was something that I really thought was just for other people, not me, but realizing that really gave me a new perspective. And I thought, I really want to do this work. And so I was fortunate enough in about a year to be sponsored by the bank to go through a diversity certification program called a Diversity Practitioners Development Program. And it was 9 months. And it was through an external vendor. And so for 7 to 10 days a month, for 9 months, it was me and 29 other very diverse members of the bank. And we sat down in a room and we talked about diversity. And we talked about inclusion, and we talked about our socialization and our beliefs and our values and what we thought about the differences and the identity groups that were in the room. And it was absolutely life-changing. I was certified so that I could lead diversity workshops at the bank across this footprint, and also, work with our employee resource groups. But I do this work all the time. I feel like now this is my life's work, 17 years later. So it's whether I'm doing a formal session like what we're doing here today, whether I am talking to family or friends, whether I am sitting at a hotel bar, because I used to, especially pre-COVID, I used to travel a lot for work, and, talking to the person next to me, I am always going to try to understand and learn a little bit from who they are and help them understand more of who I am. So again, that's how I show up as the facilitator for our session today. All right, so what I want to do now is sort of transition into group membership. So we all belong to many different groups, and there are typically 3 ways we belong to those groups. One, we're born into them, right? So we have some groups that are innate. So things like gender and race and sexual orientation. Sometimes you being fully able-bodied or not, right? So those things are innate. We're born into those groups. And then there are groups that we choose. And this is the largest number of groups that we're going to be a part of. You all work at different schools and organizations. And so choosing those, you chose to work at those organizations. Where you decided to go to school for yourself, those are groups that we choose. Whether you decide to have a family or not, whether you decide to be partnered or married or not, all these groups that we're a part of, we choose to be a part of those groups. But then there are some groups that we don't choose, we're not born into, but they are bestowed upon us. So based on some criteria, we're going to be put into these groups. And so you think about things like your tax bracket as you're getting ready to, as it's getting close to tax season here. That is a group, depending on how much money you make, you're going to be put into a tax bracket. The same thing as socioeconomic class. That's one that I think about a lot. That is bestowed upon us based on your income. And we're hearing a lot of that now in the news about different socioeconomic groups. I grew up in northern New Jersey. I grew up poor from a socioeconomic group. I grew up poor, but I never felt poor. And I didn't feel poor as a family. So those are groups that are bestowed upon us, but we don't necessarily have to feel that way. Now, before I move into talking about the individual versus the group dynamic, I also want to talk a little bit about gender, because I mentioned gender being innate, but it is, I want to tease that out a little bit because it is not that straightforward. We do have a gender that is assigned to us at birth. So we have a doctor or caregiver. So when we're born, they will look at our anatomy and they will say, congratulations, you have a beautiful, baby girl or boy, right? But we don't have any input in that gender that is assigned to us at birth. But then there's also a gender identity. So as we grow older and we start internalizing and really understanding who we are, then we identify with a particular gender. And that may or may not match the gender that is assigned to us at birth. And then there's gender expression. And this is how we express ourselves to the world, which really doesn't have anything to do with gender identity or your gender assigned at birth. Gender expression really is more in line with what societal norms are for that particular gender. So, for example, if you look at me, you can see, the way I wear my hair, I wear it low, even though I don't really have much of a choice now because I don't think it's going to grow much longer than this. But I wear my hair low. I wear a beard, as you can see. I dress in a way that would, my expression is saying that it's male. Now, earlier I talked about, privileged groups that I'm a part of. This is another one, because my gender assigned at birth, my gender identity, and the way I express myself all match, but there are many people where it does not, which is why in the very beginning, I introduced myself as Lance Bennett, and I go by the pronouns of he, him, his, because what we want to do is try to normalize that fact that our gender identity does not have to match the gender assigned or the gender what you may see. It doesn't necessarily have to match. So I wanted to just bring that in to the conversation because I thought that was important, especially when I say, gender is innate. All right, so let's talk about individuals. So we are all individuals based on our experiences, based on the way that we were socialized, based on our experiences. All those things make up who we are. So when I think about myself, I already mentioned that I grew up in northern New Jersey, so right near Newark, New Jersey. Um, my parents were married when I was born, and I had the 5 siblings, but my parents eventually divorced, and so I ended up having 2 step siblings. So I have 7 siblings. Um, so I come from a large family. I moved to South Carolina when I was in high school. And so that was a very different experience for me coming from New Jersey to South Carolina. Um, I worked in banking for over 20 years. I have been with the same woman. I married my high school sweetheart. So we have been together for 40 years, but we've been married for 33. And if she keeps me, we'll be married for 34 in May. And we have 2 children. We have a 30-year-old daughter, and we have a almost 23. It'll be 23 next week. 23-year-old son. And so I said all of that and mentioned those things to you. I'm a big sports fan, but I mentioned all those things to you because all of those things make up who I am as Lance, the individual. So when you have an engagement with me, when you have an interaction with me, that is what I am bringing to the table, is all of that. And that's what I want you to see, regardless of whether you agree with me or disagree with me. I want you to understand that is all of this makes up who I am. And I see Michelle has a hand raised, so I am going to pause and ask Michelle for the question. I see 3 participants have their hand raised, so.
Michelle said, sorry, I clicked the wrong thing.
Okay. So there are a couple of others who had their hands raised. So does anybody have a question? And if you do, you can please just come off mute and ask the question.
Actually, they can't come off of mute in the webinar, but they can put it in the question and answer area.
Okay, so we'll get to that later, Melissa. Thank you so much. All right. Okay, so let's keep moving then. And if it comes in the chat, Melissa, and if it's relevant to what I'm talking about, feel free to stop me and ask me the question, and I'll stop it and try to answer that. But as I was saying, me being an individual, all those things that make up and all those experiences that have happened to me going through the Diversity Practitioners Program make up how it ends up helping me show up the way I do. And that's what I want you to see. However, we're often seen at group level. So if you think about when you first saw me on the screen today, there were some groups that I'm sure you were able to notice, or at least make an educated guess on, right? You probably guessed around my gender and said, I think that's a guy. You saw my skin color, so you probably said, I think he's Black or African American, and you may have seen, the gray in my beard, and guess something about my age. And I will tell you, I'll be 57 next month. But you may have guessed something about my age. So those are group memberships that I belong to. And whatever your engagement, so if I were meeting you for the first time, whatever your engagement has been with those groups that I belong to is going to give you an initial reaction. And it may be, I'm excited to work with this person. It may be, I'm kind of neutral because maybe I haven't had very many experiences with people that have these group memberships. It could be, I'm not that excited because the last person that I worked with that owned those same group memberships, it didn't go very well, right? So the way that we need to kind of get past that is we need to have dialogue. So the more that we talk, so let's just say I'm in admissions, and so I know there are some admissions folks here. in the virtual room. So let's say we are working together on an admissions committee. It's my first time on the admissions committee. You don't know me very well, and I'm advocating for, a particular candidate to be admitted into our program. You may not understand why I'm advocating for that program from other than what you see from my group. So maybe it's a LGBTQ person, and I'm advocating for that person. You may be a little like surprised, or maybe a little confused if you say, oh, well, I know he's married, I know he has a family, but he's advocating for the LGBTQ community. I wonder what that's about, because my identity group may not necessarily say that right away, right? So, but the more you would learn about me, then you go, oh, he went through, a diversity practitioners program. Oh, he does diversity work. Oh, he grew up with family members that may have been gay, right? So all these things, once you start learning that, then you will understand where I'm coming from, and I become more of an individual than necessarily from the group memberships that you see. My group memberships start actually fading more to the back, and more of my individualism comes to the front. Now, let me be clear. My group memberships never go away. It's not like we don't see them. One of the things that, I would, definitely say that if there is a no-no, especially with people of color, is to say, I don't see you as a Black person, or I don't see you as a, Asian or Hispanic person. That's typically a no-no, because, we do, especially in this country, we see race pretty well. And seeing it and how you respond to it may be very different. So when I hear people say that, I usually give them a lot of grace and say, what I think I hear you say is, you're not going to treat me differently based on my skin color. And then people are like, yes, that's what I mean. I said, well, there's probably a better way to say that than to say, I don't see race at all. So group memberships, the group memberships that we belong to, absolutely is something that is seen, especially early on in our engagements, and they really don't go away. Melissa, anything that I need to respond to? I'm trying not to read the chat and
No, it's good. It's good. C just made a comment that it's easier to have a first draft conversation with an individual rather than a group.
Got it. Thank you. Okay. So the challenge, here's the challenge. So again, we talked about being an individual and wanting to be seen from the individual level. Like when I come to a decision, I want you to understand all those things about me, help me come to that decision. Agree or disagree, just understand where I come from, but we're often seen at group level. And the challenge is knowing who we are as an individual, but also knowing that we're being seen at group level. I talked earlier, one of the ways to kind of get around that is to not really get around it. One of the ways to eliminate that is to have conversation, is to have dialogue. The more we engage, the more we become individuals. But there are going to be some situations and some occasions where we are not going to be able to disengage from the group. We're only going to be seen at our group level, and there's nothing we're going to be able to do about it. And so here's where I want to give you a story about how this dynamic can work. I was leading a 2-day diversity session in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was living in Winston-Salem, so I was spending the night in Charlotte. My sister lives in Charlotte. So after day one, my co-facilitator and I, as normal, we went to dinner and we talked about the day, and we talked about what our plan would be for day 2 of the workshop. And then I said to her, I said, look, I need to go, pretty quickly, because I want to go by and visit my sister this evening. So I get back to the hotel, and I want to change out of my corporate Lance clothes, and I want to get into something that's a little more like Lance, which is my chill Lance clothes, right? So I put this slide up on purpose because I hope this would bring a smile to some people's faces. They might even be laughing, and I can't see it, so it's fine. But I remember exactly what I had on that day. I had on a baseball cap turned on backwards. I had on a t-shirt. I didn't have this chain that you see on my neck now that actually says silk, in case you were wondering. But I had on, 2 gold chains, and I had on an Adidas jogging suit. And I'm heading down to the parking garage to go see my sister. And I saw a woman walk into the elevator. And so I quickly kind of ran up and stopped the doors, and I got in the elevator with her. She was a white woman. She was probably, I'm saying probably late 30s, maybe early 40s. So I get in, and she actually has the floor to where my car is punched already. So I said, oh yeah, that's where I'm going. And when I said that, she retreated to the back of the elevator, took her bag, and she kind of clutched it like this. And she looked visibly frightened to me. Now, I'm going to stop the story here because at that point, I realized she is seeing me at group level. There are groups that I belong to that she is seeing, and I believe causing these reactions. Here are some of those groups, right? The way I was dressed, and this is in no particular order, by the way, because I'm gonna ask you that in a second. But the way I dress, the way she saw my gender, she saw my physical size, and she saw my ability because I was able to quickly kind of go up and stop the doors, right? She saw my race, and she saw my age. And at this point, I was probably 40, in my early 40s. Okay, so she saw all those groups. I'm sure that she was able to assess me really quickly and see those groups in that short amount of time when I first walked into the elevator. So now here's the work that I want you to do is, and we're going to have this poll, Melissa, up. What group do you think had the most impact on her reaction? Was it the way I was dressed, my gender, my physical size, my race, or my age? I'll give you a second to answer that, a few seconds to answer that. Okay, I see we still have a few votes coming in. There are a lot of people who aren't voting, and that's okay too. All right, Melissa, let's end and see what the results are. Okay, thank you. So 63% of you said race, that was the group that had the most impact on her. Second was the way I was dressed. 15% of you said that, and then 14% of you said gender, 8% physical size, and then 2% was my age. I think any of these could have had, and especially when you combine them together, I think definitely had an impact on her. If I were to answer the question, I would say, and we can stop the sharing, now, Melissa, but what I would say is it was gender. And the reason I say gender is I want you to put something in the chat. I want you to answer a question for me. The question is, a person in the US is sexually assaulted every what? And I'm looking for, a period of time. So a person in the US is sexually assaulted every what? Please, I want you to put an answer in the chat. Let's see, 20 seconds, 1 minute, 5 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute. Okay. I see somebody actually has the same answer that I have. Okay, great. So let me share with you the latest stats that I've been able to find is 73 seconds. And I saw that someone had 73 seconds in the chat. And the large majority of those folks are women and young girls. Now, I'm not sure if the woman in the elevator actually knew that particular statistic, but I did. And at the time, and again, this was probably 13, 14 years ago, the stat was less seconds than it is right now. I knew that stat because I was leading diversity workshops. And so in that moment, for me, I didn't believe there was anything I could do to convince this woman who I was as an individual. All those things that would make up the fact that if she knew me, she would know that I would be harmless, but I didn't feel like in this 20-second elevator ride that I would be able to change her mind. So what I did was, I'm going to go back a little bit to this slide. So what I did was I understood who I was as Lance the individual, but I also owned my group membership around gender. Um, and I realized that we as men, and I am part of that group, have this propensity to commit violence against women. I knew that. And so I could not disassociate myself with the group, even though I knew that that wasn't going to be my behavior. So I'll finish the story and say, the elevator door is open. She gets out and she walks very briskly, almost a run towards her car. And I go as slowly as I can to give as much distance as possible. To not make the matter or make the situation any more difficult. That's me owning my group. Now, did it make me feel good that I thought this woman felt like I might be threatening to her? No, it didn't make me feel good, but I also understand my group. And so by doing that, I can take that situation, separate myself, knowing what my group does, but also knowing who I am as an individual. Now, why do I even, tell this story? And before, let me say this, before I finish and kind of close this part of the session, if anyone is villainizing the woman, I want to share another really quick story. I'm leading a 2-day workshop in Atlanta, and I'm driving back from Georgia to North Carolina. I'm in rural Georgia, and I have to use the bathroom. So I pull into a rest area, and there's probably 100 or so motorcycles, almost all white, long hair, or either bald head guys, tattoos and leather and all that stuff, right? And so I pull in, and I have to make a split-second decision of, do I park or do I continue to go? I continued to go straight through the rest area and got back on the highway, okay? Now, that was me looking at a group and making a decision that I didn't think I'd be safe if I got out of my car. And if you ask me, what do I really know about white guys that ride motorcycles and have long hair and wear leather and tattoos? I know very little. But in that moment, I made a decision that I wasn't sure if I was going to be safe. Okay. And so, again, I think we have to do that. We have to make sure that we are doing the best we can to protect ourselves. And at the same time, when we get the opportunity to engage, we should do it. So if I had a class and I had the classroom full of white guys who ride motorcycles with tattoos and long hair, I'd be more than happy to have a conversation and engage them in how we might be different or how we might be the same. But in that situation, I didn't do it. So I just wanted to share that just in case anyone was saying, something was wrong with that woman, she shouldn't have done that. I own that. And the other reason that I bring these stories up about owning group memberships is because if we're going to have a truly authentic engagement with people who are different from us, we have to understand the group memberships that we belong to, especially those groups that we have privilege in. So as a man, if I am, working with a student who is a woman, or maybe a staff member or someone that might be newly reporting to me, and that's a woman, and I don't understand the historical damage that we have done as men to women. So historically, not being able to vote, um, um, not even being able, if you were married, not even be able to have a credit card in your name until 1974. So again, thank you RBG for that, right? So a married woman couldn't even have a credit card in her name. It would have to be the husband. We see lack of representation, even if we think about today in the highest levels of organizations. We know women aren't paid the same as men for the same work, right? We know there's a lot of that going on. So if I don't understand some of those things going into this engagement, and I just think, well, you know what, I'm a nice guy, so I'm just going to treat her the same as I treat everybody else, then I'm missing the opportunity to have a deep conversation and a deep engagement with her and learning about her experiences as a woman that will help me be able to shape how I show up, but also be able to help me shape how I talk to other men. As a heterosexual, if I have a student who happens to be part of the LGBTQ plus community, or maybe it's a staff member or someone who is reporting to me, and I don't understand the historical impact that we as heterosexuals, I'm part of that group, have done, not being able to have, access and to property that you might have, not being able to make health decisions on a loved one, not even being able to be legally married. And that just happened in the Obama administration, right? So if I don't understand those things and I just say, well, you know, I'm a nice guy, so I'm going to treat everybody the same and they should trust me fully because of that, then I'm missing my opportunity to have, you know, a deeper engagement and being able to learn from their experience. And I will say the same thing, that if you are a white person and you are dealing with people of color, you know, and I'll say specifically now as a Black person, right? And, you know, I'm new on your team, or, you know, I'm new working with you as a colleague, and you are not aware and not willing to acknowledge the harm that you have done to Black people, from, you know, slavery to Jim Crow to civil rights to voting rights, you know, to even today, the lack of representation in senior leadership, the pay gaps that we are seeing in African Americans compared to whites, the education, the health, and we've seen since COVID has happened, right? So if we're not willing to acknowledge that, and you say, well, Lance, I'm just going to treat you like everybody else because I'm a nice guy and you should just trust me, you know, you're missing your opportunity to have a deeper engagement with me. Or any other African American or Latinx or Asian person. You know, we can throw, you know, any particular person of color in that mix, or indigenous person as well. So that is the reason why I think, you know, this is so important, is understanding who we are as individuals, but also understanding the groups that we belong to, especially those groups that we have privilege in. And this is where we go back to, I'm going back to the very first slide, or I guess second slide that I showed you around cultural humility, is being able to acknowledge that, understand that, and then being able to learn from the experiences of others. So I'm going to pause for a second and see if there are any reactions, if anything in the chat that you want to put, and I will try to take a look and see if there's anything that I might be able to answer.
There is a question from John. He
Okay.
said, great information. How can you tell which of your group memberships are being threatening to an individual?
Well, first of all, if you understand the historical side of your group, and you know that you have a history of either, you know, discriminating, or there's an ism that's involved with it, with the group that you're a part of, especially if you're a part of the privileged group, then I think you have to go into any engagement understanding that there's probably going to be some lack of trust because of what the group has done to the discriminated against group, right? Or the marginalized group. So I think that's kind of the first thing. And then it's really going to be around just having conversation. It's going to be around, you know, if you have an opportunity to have dialogue, being able to have a dialogue and have that in a sense of learning and understanding, compared to, you know, let me necessarily fix it for you.
There's also a comment in the chat from Michelle. How can you engage individuals, co-workers on a deeper level to understand their history? What if they are not open to that?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and everyone is not open to that. I think it doesn't. You don't start there. Like, you know, I would never walk up to someone who's gay and say, you know what, I'm a heterosexual and I want to learn more about your experience. Can you tell me more about your experience as a gay person, right? I would never start a conversation like that. What I would do is try to start a conversation in general, and especially if they're a coworker or a colleague, you know, hey, get to know them. You know, like, talk about who you are, learn about who they are, and talk about things that are more in general. And then as you start building that relationship, you start building trust, and then you can start asking some questions. Maybe you can, you know, mention things that you observe. You know, I think that has always gone, you know, a long way for me to be able to say, you know, here's something that I saw on the news. I sent a, you know, a message to, you know, one of my gay friends when I saw something that on the news that I thought could have a negative impact, you know, on him and his partner. And so that, me being proactive in doing that, saying, hey, I'm just thinking about you because I saw this and I know this could possibly have an impact on you, leads him to be able to trust me more and be able to share more with me. And so we ended up, you know, that relationship continues to grow because of things like that. There is no one set way to do this. I think the biggest or the best word I can share with you is being authentic. If you're doing this to check the box, and I am not claiming anybody is wanting to do that, but if you're saying, well, okay, I know my organization is supportive of diversity initiatives, so for me to check the box, I'm going to go to an event, or I'm going to attend this, and I'm going to have this conversation, but I'm not really that interested in learning, or I think I already know what the experiences of someone different from me, someone from a marginalized group is. That's when we can get into trouble. So that's where cultural humility comes in, is going, I don't really understand the total experience, and what my experience as a Black person is can be very different if you were talking to another Black person. So I always tell people who reach out to me is, I am not I don't speak for every Black person, right? I can speak for me, and I can speak about my experience as a Black person, but I don't speak for all Blacks. And if you really want to know, you need to have multiple conversations. You need to build relationships with multiple people. And I'll give you one other thing, and it's actually in a different model that I use when I do longer workshops, is engaging uncomfortably. So if we only have conversations with people who are different from us at work, or maybe at a happy hour where there's all work colleagues there, you're probably not going to get a whole lot out of that. But if you are willing to engage someone in their difference and in their communities, then all of a sudden I think you really start getting a better understanding, and you'll build a level of cultural competency.
So we do have 2 other questions, but now note we only have 7 more minutes, everyone. How would you address xenophobia in relation to cultural humility?
I think they all, go together. And one of the things that we're doing at our school is we used to have a program where we would have our international students, and we try to get them to understand and learn more about like what is happening here in the U.S., because they're going to be in the U.S. for 2 years as an MBA student. So like things like, the Super Bowl is happening, and this is what this means, and this is what happens, and this is what people in the domestic students in the U.S. mean when they say certain things. And so it was a program that really helped them get more indoctrinated into to our American culture. But what we have shifted into is saying we need to do the same thing with our domestic students, to understand the cultures of our students who are coming to us from outside of the U.S. And so now we're launching a different program where everyone gets an opportunity to get some cultural competency from those who are from around the world. So I think that is one of the ways to kind of help alleviate some of that. I think you have one more.
Yes. If I am a white male, why do I need to go into a conversation with someone thinking I may offend this person because I am white and what whites may have done 100 years ago?
That's a great question. And I, if what I said came out as, you might offend, that was not what I meant at all. What I was saying is engaging in a conversation and trying to learn the experience of someone who is different from you is really important. But if we don't understand the historical background, and we think that someone is going to automatically trust us because we have good intentions, I think that's where we might be missing the mark. So look, I have talked about my experience as being, a man and being heterosexual, being fully able-bodied, and I didn't talk much about that, but having conversations with those who are living with disabilities, I'm willing to have those conversations, and my goal is never to offend. But if I am going to actually get to learn, I have to ask tough questions, and I have to also be willing to hear. So I would say engage authentically. Try to learn about the experiences of those, but understanding that you may not get that authentic answer right away, and relationships take time to build, especially across difference. And that's kind of the point I was trying to make. So I hope that clarifies what I was saying, and I hope that helps. And so with that, I know we have 4 minutes left, so I am going to close us out here. And oh yeah, I forgot about those slides. Let's get to here. So here's my challenge to you as we're leaving is, we all have a street called comfort zone. And I think it is important to be on that street from time to time. We can't always be on the street of challenge and always trying to learn, because it can be exhausting. It is hard work. It is intentional work. But what I would challenge you is to take some time and spend on that street of challenge and trying to really learn and understand the experiences of others. I think you will be better for it, not a better person, but you will just be better. You will learn more from it, and I think it would also help you be a better leader of students, and then if you have staff, and a better leader within your organization. So I would challenge you to do that. And one of the ways to do that is tracking self, right? Is taking a hard look in the mirror, really trying to say, am I doing things intentionally? Am I asking questions? Am I engaging in the difference? Am I spending, maybe even spending time in the marginalized groups, communities, right? Am I doing any of those things? And if I do some of those things, then am I growing? And then and if I'm learning, can I also take what I'm learning and share it with those who are part of my group, especially those privileged groups? The hardest work that I do is not engaging with difference. The hardest work that I do is talking to other males about the experiences that I learn of women. Some of the hardest work is talking, especially harder, talking to some of my heterosexual friends about the experiences of my friends who are part of the LGBTQ plus community. Hard work talking to people in my church about what I've learned. And I'm not trying to change their mind. I'm just trying to help educate them on what I know. That is some of the hardest work. And so if you are tracking self and doing that work, then bringing that back to your privileged groups are going to be super helpful. And by doing that, you will be exhibiting cultural humility. So with that, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for engaging with me. I apologize about the power cord situation. I was like mortified for about 5 minutes after I noticed that my battery looked like it was going to die. So thank you for hanging in there with me and letting me get myself back on course. And I really, again, hope that this is going to be helpful for you, helpful for your school, helpful for our students.
Just from what's coming in the chat right now, I have to say it's been very helpful. A lot of thank you, wonderful information. So yes, Lance, this has been an excellent presentation and workshop. Thank you so much.
You are very welcome. Everyone have a great rest of the week.